Today on Off the Hinges, relax, pour yourself a drink, and unwind from your week as I answer your questions and share stories about this week's trade. I'm joined by a special guest, and I have my whiskey in hand. I'm so glad you made it. Are you ready? Let's slide into the vault. Welcome to Friday. Man, Chris, I've had this on the hopper for a minute with you, and finally we have made this work. So I'm so excited for the guests to meet you. Goodness gracious. Introduce yourself. I feel like a lot don't need your introduction, but some will need it. So tell us who you are. Give us a quick intro.
Well, I'm just delighted to be with you, Josh. Love that you're doing this and just have created a platform for us to learn more from each other, which we've been doing for a lot of years, haven't we? And grateful for all the others who are joining to kind of share in the stories today. My story, my name is Chris Payne. I pastor a church in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've got 3 teenagers, so wherever you are in the world listening to this, just say a prayer for me. Probably my greatest leadership endeavor right now is leading those 3, which we can talk a little bit more about. I'm married to the beautiful Jen Payne, 20 coming up on 24 years of marriage. We met in college at Liberty University and have been together for a long, long time and journey. And she's a principal of a Christian school here in Charlotte. And as I mentioned, I pastor a church, which we can talk more about that story. I'm in my 26th year of pastoring. Started as a student pastor, went on to do pastoral care, discipleship, and then have been a senior pastor for 15 years now of New City Church here in Charlotte, North Carolina. So that's a little bit about me. We can share some more stories, but I met you, Josh. Gosh, man, it's been
about 20 years.
I was going to say about 20 years. And I think I met you through your sister.
It was
when we first connected.
Forest Hill. Yeah. Because I think you were both on staff at Forest Hill.
Yeah, we were.
And that's when, I think it was around like 2005 timeframe, somewhere in there.
I think that's right.
Give or take.
We haven't aged at all, man. Just getting better.
Yeah. I don't know if you're supposed to lie in the occupation that you hold, but yeah. That's just positive thinking. Good positive
thinking.
We haven't aged at all. Not in spirit anyway. Maybe the body betrays a little bit. I don't know. Okay. I am going to, in a little bit, I'm going to have you unpack a little bit more of your story because that's always fascinating to hear it. But I always have these 3 off the top ropes. So first one, what are you thankful for today?
Yeah, I got to talk to my son today. He's on a gap year in Montana. And so he is like off the grid, no cell coverage, limited Wi-Fi. And out of the blue today, he FaceTimed me and we had about a 5-minute conversation. And he's just really growing in his relationship with God and with others, and is just growing up. And so it was a joy to just talk with him. And that's a little thing that I'm grateful for today because it was a big deal to me.
How old is that dude now?
Jackson is 19, and Josh has played a role in Jackson's life. Has known him since he was born.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So he's 19 now. He'll be 20 this summer. Crazy.
Man, that's insane.
Yeah.
Amazing. How are your girls? They all good?
Yeah, the girls are good. So as I mentioned, I have 2 girls as well. All 3 of them are teenagers along with Jackson. But we have a senior in high school, Marin, who is going to be baptized this Sunday at church.
Awesome.
So we're excited about that. And she's headed to Liberty to study psychology and wants to be a therapist. And we have a freshman, Faith, who just made the varsity softball team. And they're out practicing in 30-degree weather right now. And
nice.
Loving life. Yeah.
Man, you know this because you went to school there as well. But for Marin, I can just say probably no higher accolades for the experience I had with getting my master's in psychology there. That's who I'm getting my PhD in psych through currently. And their school of behavioral sciences is world class, man. They are fantastic. So
that's great to hear.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So Jen and I met in biology class. I don't know if I told you this, but we met in biology class at Liberty.
Yeah.
And for those who know Liberty now, Jen and I met there in the late 90s. So I tell my kids, I didn't go to the school that you're getting ready to go to. I mean, speaking of Marin, we went to a school that was a trailer and a Coke machine, but it has definitely grown up. And we're super pumped that she wants to go. And it's not, just everybody's got to find their place. And it's not the place for everybody, but they're doing some good things. And Jen and I met there. We both got our undergrad there. And then I got my Master's of Divinity at Gordon Conwell, and then I went back. Speaking of going back, like you did, to
Mhm,
Liberty. Never thought I would go back,
mhm.
because when I was there, it was super intense and rigid. So we would say we got paroled. We didn't graduate from Liberty.
Right, right.
But I went back and got my doctorate there and had a great experience,
Yeah.
like you, like, just really met some great people and had a good experience there. We're not here to plug Liberty, but yeah, it has been a big part of our stories.
No, but yeah, it has been, and it's one of those paths that cross, and it's cool to see that your daughter is going through sort of similar curriculum that I'll be going through, and it's fantastic. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think she'll really enjoy it. They're top notch, so that's good. Yeah,
great.
they don't fund anything. I'd get nothing out of any of this endeavor, so no one is pimping me money to say
I
they're
think
good.
you
They're
have your
just
new
good.
sponsor. I think you need to send this to
I don't
Liberty
know.
and say, hey, come on,
I don't
guys.
know. They got people like JHP already dropping their names, so I think they're set on having famous people supporting them. Jackie Hill Perry, for those of you who are slow.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Okay. So, what have you been learning lately?
Oof. But the first thing that comes to my mind is we are doing a teaching right now. And I know a lot of times, like, well, you're studying, you're preaching this, so what do you learn outside of that? And I am learning stuff outside of that, but I have learned so much about what we're preaching about right now, which is heaven. We're doing a series
Mm,
on heaven. And I've taught on heaven a few times, but I've never done like a full series. So we're in our 8th week of studying heaven.
wow.
And just all from, if you have a faith background, just all from Bible passages. And one of the things I learned, Josh, is that um 55 of the 66 books in the Bible have a teaching about heaven.
Hmm.
So I mean, you think God wants us to know about this place? Like
Yeah.
he wants us to know about it. But a lot of people, and some people who are watching, or who went to church or grew up in church, or they've heard this passage somewhere. It's in First Corinthians 2, verses 8, 9. And Paul's actually quoting from Isaiah 64. He says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind. Do you remember this one? Has
Hmm.
conceived what God has prepared for those who love him, talking about heaven.
Right.
And so a lot of people think like, oh, well, we can't understand, we can't think about it, we can't visualize it. But if you go and read that passage, which may be a little challenge for those listening, go and read that passage. Paul says, but those of us who have the Spirit of God, God has revealed the secret things to us. And he
Hmm.
goes on to talk about, because we have the mind of Christ, God actually gives us a glimpse of heaven by looking out into this world. And then, of course, looking into his word. He wants us to know about heaven so that it
Right.
fills us with joy and hope,
Hmm.
as we're going through the various struggles of life, which are real in this world. So,
Yeah.
man, I've just been so encouraged, because if I'm honest with everybody listening today, even as a pastor, I'm like not super pumped about heaven.
Yeah.
It's like, it's kind of like the Kenny Chesney song, everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to go today.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it kind of, as long as it's out here somewhere, like it beats the alternative. But I'm not like super excited about what God is preparing for me,
Yeah.
and for my loved ones who believe in Jesus and are there.
Right.
So man, I've been learning a lot about that, and it's just overlapped into a lot of different things in my life right now. And then,
Hmm.
of course, I think about, which we can get into story. I think about my father. I think about people that are experiencing that reality now, and
Right.
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. That's awesome. I
I
know
bet you
you.
haven't had anybody say, I'm learning about heaven on your podcast so far, but that's my answer.
Actually, I haven't. That's a great answer. No, and I love that when, even for this episode, which is on vision, like it drives whatever topic you're speaking on. I think if you take
Yeah.
it seriously, which we do, like this is lighthearted and we're good friends. And so it's an easy conversation. But if you're in any sort of platform where people might listen and it's not worried about being sniped down, like shoot away, nobody cares. But it is about just taking some pride in how you deliver things and study to actually show that you're a little bit approved to be speaking on this topic, especially if it's something that's biblical or scriptural. And that is also
Yeah.
biblical. So I think preparing for today even drove me to just really dig into like, what do I actually think about this topic?
Yeah.
And it's not, I won't give you, adulterated thoughts or impregnate your mind on like, you'll come at it with your angle. I'll come at it with my angle. Might be a line. It might not be. That's irrelevant. But it just really challenges me every time I step to the plate for discussing a new virtue and hosting other people to share their perspectives, to
Yeah.
really dig into learning something I might be familiar with, but every
Yeah.
time something new is revealed, and I'm like, I actually have to challenge myself and go like, ooh, why do I think that way? Because someone's going to be
Yeah.
clapping back at me a little bit if I'm not tight on this. So
Yeah.
it's a healthy challenge that I'm glad you're learning that. That's good.
Yeah, and man, I hadn't honestly, I hadn't planned on it, but now that you're sitting here talking, I'm like, well, actually, what Jesus is doing in John 14, which is his final conversation with his disciples, where he says,
Hmm.
I'm going to prepare a place for you, John 14, is he's giving them a vision.
Yeah.
Like he's which he always was casting vision, but he's on his final night with them, he's casting a vision for what's to come.
Hmm.
And he's saying, like, one day you're going to join me in this place. This is the what's ahead.
Right.
So it actually is. It's interesting that heaven and the teachings about heaven in the scriptures really are a vision, a picture of a reality to come that's meant to encourage us, inspire us, fill us with hope,
Right.
in the troubled world we live in today.
Right. And so much of it is being patient and waiting for that because in due time it'll come. But it's not a passive patience either because
No.
it's very driven. I mean, you look at that, the commission of go into the world, it's just very action based. So there is something
Yes.
that will come. You need to wait, but waiting doesn't mean twiddling your thumbs and just
No.
Jesus take the
And
wheel. Come on, man.
no. And like, again, I know I'm kind of being, because I'm a pastor. So for those
Sure.
listening, I'm going to drop, scriptures here, but like, when Paul, is
Hmm.
talking about heaven, he says in Philippians 1:21, check me on that, for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. So he's saying, like, you know, I want to go and be with Jesus in heaven, but for me to live now is all about Jesus and all about
Right.
living for him and a vision for my life. Talk about a guy that was pretty clear about God's vision for him here and in
Right.
eternity. But he doesn't just to say, like, heaven isn't meant to be like this, or even as we talk about vision isn't meant to be escapism,
Right.
of like, well, I just don't even want to think it and deal with what I'm going through now, so I'm just going to think about sitting on a beach in Mexico. That's my vision for the future, and that's going to solve everything. And even when it comes to heaven, it wasn't meant to be like a, hey, check out mentally.
Right.
Paul is saying, I'm living in this tension between, I want to be with Jesus, but I want to stay here so I can encourage and grow your faith. It's a fascinating passage. It's Philippians 1, like 20 through 27,
Hmm.
28. If you go read that, and he's basically like, I'm kind of torn between these two worlds, but he's very clear from a vision perspective of like where I'm going,
Right.
but like where I'm going informs where I am. So he
Mm.
says, I want to go to heaven, but it's better for me to stay here with you so I can encourage your faith and grow. And by the way, his words are all others focused.
Right.
His vision of heaven has made him live an others focused life here, which
Mm.
is, again, to kind of get into it a little bit, like it is a preview of the power of vision for now, like how it
Right.
affects our world now and our actions now.
Yeah. And yeah, we're going to dig into this. This is going to be so good. You guys, you're welcome for having Chris on, by the way. Just,
Yeah.
throw that out there. Okay. Number 3. How do you hope to grow and transform as hopefully you can find time to rest and reflect? I normally say heading into the weekend, but as a pastor, I feel
Yeah.
like your rest and reflection is probably not on the weekend. It's probably in the seams between the Saturday, Sunday prep. So when you do have time to
Hmm.
unplug, how are you trying to grow and transform your own life?
Well, I would say, I mean, it's interesting. Kind of my answer is in the question. I'm continuing to try to grow and finding rest and margin to reflect. Because
Mm,
if anybody's on here has done Enneagram work, I'm an Enneagram 3. But the 3, if you go and look this stuff up, if you're interested in Enneagram, which is
hmm.
just, whether you like an Enneagram or not, all it is it's typing of personality and temperaments.
Right.
But meaning I tend to be a more driven, goal oriented, accomplishment type person.
Right.
So it's very difficult for me to just sit and be like, I mean, like even when I'm sitting, I'm like, what am I reading? What am I listening to? How am I,
Hmm.
even in your question, how am I growing as I'm resting? Like I can become fixated on it. So man, honestly, like I'm trying to learn, I'm 47 years old. I'm trying to learn how to Sabbath,
Yeah.
which is,
That's good.
ceasing. What am I ceasing on a regular basis for 24 hours? And then what am I feasting? Meaning like what am I indulging in, like in appropriate ways, like whether
Right.
it's food, exercise, whatever, but stuff that brings me life,
Hmm.
that I'm just feasting on God's creation and his goodness,
Right.
and reflecting and restoring, which we can geek out on Sabbath stuff, but that's something I'm really learning and trying to grow in the margins of life, of just actually learning how to rest.
Hmm.
and how to cease from. Really what it is for me, Josh, is it's to cease from striving.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult for me. I don't know if anybody listening in is, if it's difficult for you guys, but it's difficult for me to cease striving.
Hmm.
I feel like I kind of clock out of the pastor role and then I clock into the dad role, or I clock into the husband role, or I got a list of stuff to do around the house, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's just all one list to another list. So just learning how to, like, man, what does it look like once a week? Because shockingly, from a Judeo-Christian ethic, like God said, you should rest
Right.
on a fairly prescribed basis, like
Yeah.
once a week for a 24-hour period.
Hmm.
So again, this isn't a Sabbath podcast, but it's something I'm really for the first time in my life learning how to do.
Man, I mean, this is a podcast where you say whatever you want because you're the guest, so that's exactly what it's about. But yeah, I love that because this is also I get some flack sometimes at the end of a podcast episode where people are like, "Man, your third question is yeah, it's an open-ended question, but it's pretty leading because like you're expecting when I respond that I do find rest." I'm like, "Yeah, I am leading people. I'm not waterboarding you, but I'm leading you to water with it. That like, how are you finding rest to hopefully grow? Because I think that's the place in which real growth comes. Whether it's physically, you're resting from some hard physical training,
Yeah.
spiritually, mentally, if you want to talk about interleaving or different things with like learning models where like you jump between different things and you're taking a break from one so that you can learn from another thing. So it's just proven holistically that rest is so necessary to actually grow and see positive gains and a net
Yes.
positive in something. So I love that response. Great
Yeah.
job.
And your body needs it. And your body, your body keeps score, right? So
Oh man.
it'll, your body is more honest with you than probably anything about you. And,
Yeah.
the body is, I'm saying this as a pastor, of course, all this is deeply spiritual, and
Hmm.
God wired you up the way that you are. So it'll tell on you.
Real
It,
quick.
it 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 will tell you that, like, I was mentioning the kind of joy of my day, talking to my son for a few minutes unexpectedly. He dislocated his shoulder a few weeks ago sledding
Cool.
and tubing in Montana. So, of course, as a 19-year-old, and but he's in a sling and he's like, it's driving me crazy. But, of course, where I'm going with this is the doctor's like, the only way it's going to get better is if you rest it.
Yeah.
Like, if you keep stretching and you keep doing push-ups and you keep lifting, you keep doing whatever, it's never going to heal.
Hmm.
And that is a great little metaphor for many of us spiritually and emotionally. Like, I keep doing all the stuff and I don't cease, and be
Hmm.
still.
Yeah.
Psalm 46:10, right? Be still and know that I'm God. Really hard
Right.
to do.
Yeah. It's so hard, man. All right. So this is one you started dipping your toe a little bit in this pond, but just however you want to write this. What's your story?
Whew. What is my story?
Hmm.
Um, Let me
That's a
start.
doozy.
It is a doozy. Let me start with family of origin.
Hmm.
And you're the expert here, so you can jump in if you need to and redirect me. But I do think family of origin probably has more impact on us than almost any other thing in our lives. Certainly faith and, the people we hang out with now, things
Yeah.
we study, but our family of origin, is so strong and powerful. And it's, of course, for all of us, everyone listening in, is full of dignity and depravity.
Yeah.
It's full of wonderful things and it's full of awful things. And that's
Hmm.
my story. I grew up in the Charlotte area, kind of where I am now. So I'm a rare person that has been in the same area my whole life,
Hmm.
um, which is a blessing and then sometimes a challenge. Another conversation for another day. If you're in a profession right now, or you're in a spot where you've been for more than 3 to 5 years, typically 3 to 5 years is a good growth season or cycle, and you need to kind of, I wouldn't say reinvent, but you almost need to rehire or refire yourself in 3 to 5 years. And sometimes your colleagues and coworkers and neighbors and friends and people you grew up with have a really hard time with you becoming, who you are becoming on the journey, and letting
Right.
you become a new person, letting you
Hmm.
change those old ways, letting you. So a lot of people, when they bounce from job to job or geography to geography, it's really about, I've got to find new people and new places to be the person that I'm becoming, because
Right.
People, so from a spiritual perspective, Jesus said it this way: a prophet's without honor in his own hometown. Meaning, people were going like, "Dude, you're the guy that was like, the carpenter's son, and like, and the t-ball league. How could you be Jesus?"
Right.
So what I'm saying is, growing up in this spot is a big part of my story and staying here.
Hmm.
I have two sisters. I have a twin sister, um, who's a midwife, and then I have an older sister who actually is a part of our church. My mom and dad were not people of faith. I guess everybody has a faith, but they didn't have faith in Jesus.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. Like, I'm a pastor, but I didn't grow up in a church home.
Hmm.
I didn't grow up in a Jesus home. Some of you grew up in church homes, but you didn't grow up in Jesus homes, and we could talk about that some other time too. But my parents were not followers of Jesus. But if you asked them, they would have said, "Oh yeah, no, we're spiritual. Like and they
Right.
probably would have said we're Christians, just because we grew up in the South." But
Bible Belt,
it
baby. You're a
yeah.
Christian
So
because
we
you were born in Carolina.
we were
Makes
born
sense.
into this, right?
Yeah.
That's how it
Right.
works.
Naturally.
Um, but somewhere around 10 or 11 years old, my mom's life really changed. And man, it's so interesting. And again, just for those of you watching, like I'm so curious about everybody else's story listening to this. But the power of proximity. And there was a person, what I mean by that is there was a neighbor right by us in proximity that
Hmm.
invested in my mom and invited her to come to, I guess it was like an afternoon tea or something, but it really was a Romans Bible study, which Romans is a book of the Bible, which is a pretty in-depth book of the Bible.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not like light reading. And my mom stayed,
Mm.
because they were like, "Hey, we just want you to be here. If you don't want to stay, you don't have to stay. You can just hang out with us and then leave, when we start the study, but you're welcome to join us." And she stayed
Hmm.
and got introduced to this man named Jesus, and started talking to us about him, and then took us to a church that talked about him, and that's where my faith, in Jesus started to come alive, and that's a big part of my story. Everybody in my family, my mom, my dad, my two sisters, all came to faith in Jesus through that neighbor. So her name was
Yeah.
Charlotte Martin. She's in heaven now. Speaking of heaven, had MS and passed away, but God used her in an incredible way. Just lived down the street. Just so happened that this, Payne family moved in, and she just took it upon herself to invest, which is
I'm gonna
awesome.
hit a quick pause button here,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
not literally, but figuratively, and inject because I know you won't forget your own story. But I just think for people listening, man, it's so encouraging to meet and see people who are just that, who are encouraging and who are not. And this sounds cliche, but it's cliche for a reason, and it's so true. They're not trying to invest in making a difference in everyone's life, but they are so purposeful with a small few, or maybe even just one.
Yeah.
And that can link into vision. A lot of things can. But I just think with a lot of people trying to make themselves known or get a lot of like social media attention or whatever, if you have like a very honest and pure purpose in your heart to really connect with people and help them, just find one person. It's not that hard. I promise you, there's a lot of people
There
that
are.
need help and they would love just an encouraging word. So be that person to like one person. Find
Yeah.
one and maybe start with your family. That would be a good part. But that
Well,
is so powerful.
I
It's
was
like
going to say, Josh, like a lot of us think like, man, one day I'm going to travel to X place, or I'm going to go to
right.
whatever and make a difference, or and that's awesome. I mean, that's
Sure.
awesome if that happens. But man, a lot of times it's 7 feet away at your dinner table,
Dude, it well
or or
yeah, when
or
when you
down or
said
down the road, my neighbor, who made
when
an
you said
eternal
Jackson's
difference.
19 and I'm sitting here going like I've known this dude his whole life and he's now basically like an adult out the door of the Payne household and I'm struck almost daily with the short amount of time that I actually have my girls who are young, 8,
Yes.
6 and 2. All right. So almost 3. So like they're young girls, but that first 8 years has zipped by, man, with Aria. So when I look at that, I go, I'm a fool if I'm not investing first and foremost in them daily. And that's not my first priority. And I'm not looking at all, chasing all the other things. Um, yeah, it sort of hits me sometime how it actually is really easy
Yeah.
to be intentional with a small circle of people. And then when you look at your story, which will continue to unfold now, but the impact that you have had on, let's say, my life, other people's lives, and just literally the platform that you have received as a senior pastor where you're at. And you can walk that story back to someone who reached out to your mom and
Yep.
introduced her to the man that changed everything for you. So that is
Hmm.
just such a simple, powerful story that I think people forget how simple it can be.
Yes. And, I love the word simple there because people are complex. I'm complex. You're complex. Everybody listening is complex. And we have
Definitely.
complex stories and we live in a
Hmm.
complex world. But complexity in our stories, and I'll continue mine, typically when you plumb line it down through all the complexities, it comes down to a very simple story.
Yeah.
Someone who invited you to something, someone who invested in you, someone who noticed you, who saw you, spoke to
Hmm.
you. Very simple acts.
Yeah.
So yeah, that changed our family. Now, here's what I would say. All of us became followers of Jesus, but everything didn't, get solved. My
Hmm.
mom and dad still had a family of origin. They still had brokenness. We still had brokenness, and we were, broken all over each other, right? And so, middle school, high school years, I really wasn't following Jesus, and it wasn't really until I got to, and no kidding, guys, we're not plugging Liberty, but until I got to Liberty then I realized like, oh, there's more to this whole fate thing than just like, well, I know where I'm going when I die.
Hmm.
Like, what am I doing now? Like, how is
Right.
that vision affecting my life now? And I really began to get a vision for my life in ministry. I went to school to get a business degree and to go figure out how to scrape out a living. Honestly, I had
Yeah.
no vision for, and I was, this may not be interesting to many people, but I was in this chapel service and at Liberty, you had to go to like chapel like 50 times a week. So for all the years that I didn't go to church, like I feel like God was like, here you go. Like in 4 years, I went like a lifetime of sermons,
Yeah.
which was
They opened up
great
the
for
dam.
me.
Yeah.
They opened up the dam and I'm like, like, yeah, like I'm getting it all. But it was
Yeah.
great for me. I needed to grow, right?
Yeah.
And in one of those services, I don't even remember who it was that was preaching, but he said, hey, I'm gonna do like an old school come forward, here at the platform and kneel down.
Right.
But it's not to come into a relationship with Jesus. There's somebody here in the room. This was like thousands of people in the room. There's somebody here in the room that has a call of ministry vocationally on their life, that God has a vision for that you need to surrender to it. And you need to just take the physical act of surrender. And
Hmm.
man, I found myself like getting up out of my seat, full on like walking down the aisle, telling myself the whole time to go sit back down. Um,
What are you doing? Sit down.
but bottom line, like, man, that whole night changed my life. And I
Right.
really believe something in the spiritual realm changed as I just
Hmm.
physically surrendered to that.
Right.
So the reason why that's so important in my story is like obviously that changed my trajectory, my vision for my life.
Hmm.
I began taking religion classes, learning about faith, and that parlayed into going to seminary. As I mentioned, I met Jen in biology class, and we were engaged and married in 2001. We got married in June of 2001. She started teaching that fall. I was in seminary, and then of course 9/11 happened. That changed so much
Hmm.
of everybody's life. Um, I almost joined the Navy. I would have joined your family tree. There were the Marines and Navy, but
Right.
Jen vetoed that. Was like, no way, my year one husband is going to join the Navy.
Right.
So I just, I'll come back to that in a little bit, but put that away and finished seminary. But something really tragic happened in my life in 2002. Underneath, a lot of good things happening. Of course, there's always struggles. And my parents, and coming back to their stories, they had never fully reconciled their stories with each other,
Hmm.
and they ended up separating. And my dad kind of spiraled, and all that concluded with him taking his life in December of 2002.
Hmm.
So I was 23, um, and just had to grow up quick with,
Yeah.
I was the executor of his estate. I'd never been obviously through any kind of loss like that. My dad was one of my best friends at that point. We had really grown very close to each other, and I was completely shocked.
Right.
The more I began to understand what he was going through, which I still am 20 plus years later, the more I, was attuned and more empathetic to the struggles that he was uniquely carrying, but I didn't know a lot of them.
Right.
And he hit a lot of those things for me. So we can come back and pull on that thread if you want to, but that was a major event in my life, obviously, a major
Yeah.
tragedy, a wound, and a sadness that I, carry with me today. Um, yeah, and a few years later, we welcomed our first son, Jackson, who we've mentioned, and started having children. And then had eventually three. My wife was home with them. We were blessed to be able to do that. And then we had this crazy idea. Fast forward to 2009 to plant a church. We were at a wonderful place, had a wonderful position there, and had been there 11 years, but felt like God was really calling me again to step out,
Hmm.
um, to lead something, to do more in my leadership. And so we ended up starting a church in our living room, in 2010. And that's the church I'm still at. It turns 15 years old next week, and has been such a journey, such a ride of a lot of twists and turns,
It's
but
not in his
incredible.
living room anymore, by the way.
It's not in our living room
It's not
anymore. No,
that. I don't think
no,
you would have that capacity, dude.
no,
Your
that's
house,
right.
your house isn't that big. No,
No, we outgrew that.
absolutely not.
And that's been such a thrill, to be in, one place and be stable and, see something grow, which we can talk about vision in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So I'm happy to go back and revisit any part of that story, but thanks for everybody for listening to some of that. It's crazy that when I said I'm 47, I still feel like I'm like 25
Hmm.
in my heart.
Right.
It's just when I get up in the morning, I realize I'm not.
True. That's a fact. Yeah. I mean, so much of that story resonates, man. I mean, story with my dad, and I shared this when I introduced
Yeah.
Chris last week, but Chris was there. We share a lot of similarities in that with both of our dads separating from our moms, catching us off guard, and then both of them committing suicide. So and Chris was there. He did the funeral service for my dad. Then he married Laura and me. So there's a lot of just connections. But I will say this about Chris too, with the being intentional to really care about people. And I talk with Micah about this sometimes because almost every year, like clockwork, because my sister, I have two older sisters, and Chris will send a message like, "Hey, love you guys, thinking of you," and it's on the day that of course, he was involved with those services, so he knows the day. And man, it's maybe his memory's that good, but it's probably because he made some sort of reminder. Because I just know how he is, so he's thoughtful to say, "I'm going to reach out to these guys and let them know because I know this is a tough thing," and that comes from your own experience with such a tough thing that catches you like a haymaker, and it's you can find some goodness and some beauty in the ashes, but man, that's life, and that's so many people have stories that maybe they don't share, so I'm so thankful that you do that. You are such a strong leader, and we've talked a lot, man. We've shared a lot of just discussions on our own journeys in life and business choices and career choices and family choices and everything, and we've had a really close brotherhood
Yeah.
together, but
Yeah.
so much of that has just been being there for each other, and I really
Yeah.
value that. So thanks for sharing that part of your story,
Oh
because it's
man. Yeah.
because
Thanks
if
for
it
listening.
pops, man, it stings a little bit because
It
it's real.
does.
It's
Still
real.
does. For
Yeah,
sure.
man. So
Mm.
you've done it a little bit. So how would you just concisely, so we can get into some of the listeners' questions, but how would you frame and explain vision if you like had
Mm.
a 60-second to 120-second elevator pitch and you're trying to give someone a framework, a mental model for vision? How would you do that?
Vision for me, and I'll just give the disclaimer that if you go to your local bookstore, you'll see 1,000 different definitions of vision.
Right.
So you asked me, so this is my very simple
I
working
sure did.
definition of vision. Vision is a picture of the future. It's a picture of where you're going in the future. Now, I think you could take time out of it, and you could vision, you could think about the past, the present, the future, because story is in all three realms.
Mhm.
But I do think vision tends to live in front of us. We can see how vision is in our rearview mirror, but it tends to be windshield. And by the way, you didn't ask me this, but so my working definition is, that vision is a picture of the future, and leadership is taking people to that future that they would not go on their own.
Right.
They would not or could not go there on their own.
Right.
Some people won't go there. Some people just, they can't. They literally can't take the steps to do that without a leader coming alongside of them and, encouraging them, equipping
Right.
them, walking with them. So we can unpack both of those, but that would be my definition.
I like it. Solid and concise. Okay, so from Lynn's, and so Lynn's is such a great friend, and she always comes with great questions, man. So I love this because I have so many talks with her and her husband, and they're really dear friends of Laura and mine. She asks, "What do you do with doubt? Is it
Mhm.
ignored, invited in for dissection? Do you set it on fire?" So
Mhm.
ready, set, go. What you got on that?
Mm. One of my favorite quotes on doubt is, "It's better to doubt out loud than to disbelieve in silence."
Mm,
So I think as a leader, whether you have because every leader has doubts, whether they admit to it or not, they do. They have
mhm,
self doubts. They have doubts in their people. They have doubts in the vision. They have doubts in the abilities. All the things.
right.
And your people have doubts. They have doubts about you. They have doubts about themselves. Um, and so I would just say that I would start with learning to make friends with your doubts, in the sense that I have gone through parts of my life where I scold myself for having doubts, or I scold people around me that I'm trying to lead for doubting me or doubting, my leadership or where we're going or the vision or rah rah. And I hope I'm growing to learn that doubts actually live beside, I'll use a spiritual word, faith.
Hmm.
To me, um, I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's binary, like opposite of doubt is faith, but I do think faith sits on the other side of the fence of doubt.
Hmm.
And those two live side by side. They
Right.
just do. And so a lot of times I don't, I'm not here to pick on anybody, but I don't like the phrase like faith over fear, even though I believe that faith can help us to control and harness our fear. But I don't like it in a pejorative way that somehow faith, the more faith you have, it means you won't be afraid or have doubts.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
telling you from a spiritual perspective, but just from a leadership perspective throughout history, some of
Right.
the greatest impactful leaders that led their people to a place that they would not and could not go on their own had incredible self doubt,
Hmm.
doubts about their abilities, doubts about their people, all the things. So um, I'll stop there, but that's what a couple minutes on doubt. I think just, doubt. I don't think you squash doubt, you burn it. I think you acknowledge it and you begin to unpack and pull the threads of doubt. Where's that doubt coming from?
Right.
And by the way, guys, and I know a lot of counselors and people in that realm are listening to this. Obviously, Josh, you're in that world. Like, I do think like where and what and how questions are so much better, than why questions.
Yes.
So why are you doubting me, or why are you guys afraid, or why am I feeling this way? Again, it doesn't always have to be negative, but typically people, when they hear a why question from you, get defensive.
Hmm.
But if they say,
Yeah.
so just let's unpack this. Like if you just said, Chris, I'm kind of doubting your leadership. And I said, Josh, why would you doubt me? Okay, now we're pulling both sides of the road. But if I
Right.
said, I wonder where that doubt's coming from for you.
Right. Right.
Well, you haven't followed through on things, Chris. You don't seem to kind of have a clear, you could just, okay, now we're actually having a productive conversation about pulling the thread of where the doubt is coming from. So I think when
Right.
you're feeling doubt as a leader or your people are, I think if you can make friends with doubt instead of squashing it and setting it on fire, and start pulling the thread of doubt, it gets you to a more productive answer of like something's underneath that doubt that's probably legit that
Hmm.
needs to be talked about.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to package it because I feel with leadership, even if it's just in the home, and it can become very simple with a
Yeah.
small child. A lot of doubt, I feel like it goes hand in hand with just sort of like the curiosity of learning something that's maybe not even intimidating. Maybe it's just a novelty. So, like, if it's a novel idea, there's a lot of doubt because it's literally the unknown. I don't
Yes.
know what's coming, so I'm doubting what's going to happen because my brain hasn't learned this ever for the first time.
Yes.
And I think it's easy to make that connection as a parent or an adult to a small child and say, well, of course they're going to have doubt because they've never understood or learned it. But we just assume that grown adults have experienced or learned and understood all the things that we have understood and learned. And I'll use, air quotes for that because who knows how much we really have on a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if you give some grace to people and some patience to really get to the heart of where that question comes,
Yeah.
curious, and I do love it. Why puts a lot of people on the defensive? What, how, more open ended, just inquisitive. questions are so helpful
Yeah.
to really get at the heart of like, where's this person coming from? And let them unpack that for me. And I think it's really nice to be honest as a leader in those moments
Yeah.
or even as a coach. And I've had to do this in sessions before and say, hey, thanks for sharing that. I need some time to sit with that for a minute. So
Hmm.
I don't have a response for you. You can unpack that but if you're asking me to switch from like a listening coach to maybe a little bit more of giving you some insight, I need to sit with that for a little bit because I don't know yet. So I'd love to hear you continue to unpack it, but I'm not going to come back with something that's out of context or not correct. So
Yeah.
either help inform me more or give me some space to like let it breathe so I can like
Yes.
mull through it and actually saturate it and incubate it a little bit more before I can have an idea. So I
Yeah.
think we're so quick to clap back or have a response or I need to solve the problems now. And we are so impatient instead of just being comfortable that doubt is okay. And it's just helping someone learn something or see something differently. And that's not
Yes.
a bad thing. So I
And
love the way you
yeah,
frame that.
I think the ninja move with doubt is, instead of pushing it aside, squashing it, is to actually pull it, what's underneath the doubt,
Right.
and especially as leaders, and whatever realm that might be for those who are listening. It's very easy as a leader yourself or leading other people to just push it aside or squash it because it feels like it's going to be something that stands between you and the place you want to take people. But a lot of
Right.
times it's a flare. Think about it that way. Doubt is shooting a flare up in the air, like something's amiss here.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one of the things, in the leadership realm, like a lot of times people's doubts have nothing to do with the vision, the leader. It has
Right.
everything to do, speaking of story, with their story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a chance for a leader to nurture that person and come around them and say, like, man, like you just did with me, and honoring, like, tell me your story. Like,
Right.
tell me the first time you felt doubt in your life. Have you ever
Yeah.
felt this way before? Because most people could identify, I'm feeling the same way I felt, when I was in third grade and I whatever, and like they could just plumb line it of like, man, this thing's been with me my whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think to respond, Lynn, thanks for such a great question. That's because that is doubt with vision can be so hand in hand with someone who's like, I don't get this yet. I'm doubting that you're taking us the right way. Maybe kids doubting what you're doing as a parent or whatever. But I think it's the worst thing you can do is ignore it or set it on fire.
Yeah.
Because I think as a leader, if you shut people down or you ignore it or you tell them to ignore it, I can promise you if someone does not have clarity yet and you ignore that, it's not going anywhere.
No,
So like the doubt's going to remain. And then all you've done in your position of
it's going to
leadership
remain.
or even if you're not a leader, even if it's just a friend and they felt like they could confide in you and come to you with something and communicate to you. And then you didn't hold that space with them well. And you either shut it down or you say, disregard that, but it's still a thing to them. You might have done some relational damage that's going to be hard to unravel because they trusted you and then you shot them down. So it's like, all right, now
Yeah,
what? You're my
that's
leader
right.
and you don't even want to listen to my thoughts. Okay, cool, man.
Yeah.
Whatever. So,
Hey,
man,
can I read something?
absolutely. I
This
hope
is
you
what I
do.
thought about, and I don't want. I know we want to get to a few more things before we finish, but
Now, have at it.
because I'm the pastor on the podcast here. So when you
You sure
say
are.
doubt, okay, when you say doubt, here's the passage that sticks out to me. And if anyone want to look it up, check me on it. It's Matthew 28, verse 17. Let me give 10 seconds of context. Jesus has resurrected. He's appeared for 40 days to his followers, 500 plus people. This is his final word to his disciples. And he's physically standing in front of them. And this is what it says. This is Matthew 28:17. When they saw Jesus, they worshiped him, but some of them doubted.
Mm. And the dude's
And
right there.
and he's right there. And then what happens next? If you go read it, what happens next is Jesus gives the greatest commissioning of a leader that's ever been given, that's changed the world. And what happened right before is a lot of his followers doubting.
Mm-hmm.
And he could have been like, that's it. Like I was gonna give you guys an awesome vision and invite you into this, but like I'm gonna smoke all of you now, because you're
Literally, I'm going
still
to set it
doubting
on
me. Yeah.
fire, all of
Yeah.
you.
But I love that, right? It's like, man, here's like people legit that are doubting and confused and
Right.
angry, and he's like, man, just you're welcome. You're still welcome to be a part of this,
Right.
and I'm going to commission you just as much as I am the person jumping up and down. So that's, to
Yeah,
me, that's pretty cool.
that is. Well, and thanks for the context, because the context is everything, instead of just, cherry picking a verse that doesn't have the context. But that is good, because you got to make choices in the face of doubt and keep
Yeah,
pressing with what you know
that's
is
right.
your vision.
Yeah.
So, what vision are you personally waiting for?
Oh, wow. Well, um, can I answer what I'm waiting to see that it will come to pass?
Yes,
Okay.
you answer that
So
however you want.
we just went through a whole re-envisioning of our church.
Okay.
And again, I'm speaking from a spiritual perspective. Everybody has to find their realm in all this, but
Hmm.
we took about a year or two as leaders, about 30, 40 people, to walk through and to simplify as best we could, what we know our like church's vision is, but to crystallize that in a really meaningful, forward facing, again, back to the definition of vision, it's a picture of the future, and
Right.
leadership is taking people to a picture of the future that they would not and could not go on their own. And so for us, it was helping people find and follow Jesus here, near, and far. And we just had three buckets. Again, I'm just a very simple thinker and leader. And to me, complexity is the enemy of growth in so many
Hmm.
ways. And so I'm not saying that people are complex, problems are complex, stories are complex, but the more simple we can make vision, the more, I think it is doable and something that we can see come to pass.
Right.
So here, near, and far for us was proximity buckets. And
Yeah.
we began to write out a story of how we would see people find and follow Jesus in those three proximity buckets, here, near, and far. Um, and I'm waiting to see that come to pass in a way of our church, I think, has heard it and they're accepting it and they're literally, supporting it. But as a leader, you really see it come to pass when other people begin to share that vision with others.
Hmm.
So it's one thing for Josh, for you, for me, or for those of you who are listening right now in your areas of business or military or church or wherever it might be, family, to be the champion. But when someone that you've been investing in begins to share that with someone else, to me, that's when I don't want to say arrived, but I think that's when your vision has really come to pass. To your
Right.
question, there's an old axiom, an old rabbinic saying that says, "You don't become a disciple until you make a disciple."
Hmm.
And
That's good.
I might take that and say, you don't really become a leader until you've made a leader, until somebody is leading someone else.
I think that's yeah, I mean, it's the fruit that gives witness to what you've been doing. I mean,
Right.
some things you'll never see. I actually believe that. Maybe it's just because that's the nature of time. And also maybe that's to protect us in our own pride at times. Like, we'll get recognition when we moved on from this life and when we're in
Yeah.
heaven, where we can actually like handle the
Yeah.
gift and the blessing that we are meant to receive for it. So it probably protects us a little bit from our pride and ego.
For
But
sure.
there are plenty of things that you can see and like start reaping some of the fruit from like meaningful actions.
Yes.
Uh, and I like that can be a both and, not an either
Yes.
or type
Yes.
situation. That's a great response. Okay, last one. If you walk away from this podcast and you're like, man, I wish Josh or one of the listeners would have asked me this, what is
Hmm.
that question related to vision? What is that question? And how do you respond to it?
Hmm. Um, I think I would put it in the realm of how important is vision.
Mm,
So we could probably rephrase that question a couple different ways. Why do I need a vision? Why is it important? How do you get it? I would want to talk about that for a minute
yeah.
because I do think that every person individually, and then of course corporately, whether it's a team, it's a family, it's a unit, whatever it might be, needs a vision. And
Hmm.
again, my definition of vision is a picture of the future. And my definition of leadership is taking people to that picture of the future that they would not and could not go on their own.
Right.
So working off of those two definitions, I would say, just why is vision and leadership important? Um, and I would say that people without a picture of their future vision die a little bit every day. And I don't
Hmm.
mean that just physically. I mean emotionally, relationally, spiritually, professionally. Probably put a lot of other categories there. And I'm not just the only one saying this. Like there is some good wisdom, and there's actually, shocker, a passage about this where the writer of Proverbs, who is known as the wisest man in the world, Solomon says, without vision, people perish.
Hmm.
In other words, they die without a picture of where they're going,
Right.
and what is this all about. So I think when we talk about vision and we just get real level set, honest with each other, it's essential for life. And I don't think it always has to be like a pithy statement or,
Right.
like something on a wall. It literally could be a photo that sits on your desk. It could
Hmm.
be something that on your screen that you look at every time, you use your phone. It's
Right.
something that reminds you of a reality to come that you're working towards, you're sacrificing for, you're leading towards, whatever the adjective might be.
Right.
Um, anyway, that's what I would say. What the question would be, why is vision important? And my answer would be because without it, we die a little bit every day.
Before we close this out, first of all, please give the Morano family love to Jen and the
Yep.
kids. I'm so proud of you guys. But to our listeners, if you're in the Charlotte area, just go check out this guy's church. Go listen to this guy, because
Mm.
a really dear friend of mine, Barbara Van Patter, who was sort of like my second mom growing up, she sat in one day on a service because Chris did sort of like an interview with me a while back at one of his church services. When it was at the first sort of warehouse
Yep.
type campus
Yep.
that you guys had. And Barbara came and sat in on that. And she listened to some of the things Chris said. And she was like, man, he is just one of the wisest speakers I think I've listened to.
Mm.
And she's grown up in the church. She's grown up with a lot of, like, she was a world traveler for music, a very intelligent and dear person. And when she listened to Chris, she was just like, the wisdom that he has and the way he articulates it is fantastic. And I'm not just saying this to blow smoke because he's here, but man, I love this guy dearly. And if you have a chance to go listen to his stuff online, or if you're in the QC, the Queen City and Charlotte area, like, stop in on a weekend and go check it out, because what they're doing is real. And they're actually making an impact on people's lives and in that city and in the community. And you don't get more authentic than Chris Payne. You just don't.
Mm.
So I'm so thankful for you. And for my girls and Laura, this is always for you. So I hope you can look back on this one day and just see the tight connections that I had with brothers like Chris and the things that he's
Mm.
left with. This is part of my vision, is leaving something for you all in the future that you can fall back on and find some wisdom and find some encouragement and find some love and some joy in the midst of whatever life takes you through. So man, the fact that I could have this time in this space with you is just second to none. I'm
Mm.
so thankful for you. But before we close it out, anything you'd like to say before we hang it up for the day?
Yeah, just same back to you. Lots of love to you, Josh, and to the family, and grateful for our brotherhood. And for those of you who listened today, thanks for listening to my story. That's a sacred thing to me. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful for that, and definitely praying for each of you. And it's a joy to be with you, Josh.
Yeah, I love you, brother.
Love you.
All right. Have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Off the Hinges. Don't forget to follow Foundational Coaching on your favorite social media platforms. Kick off your Saturday with me tomorrow morning at Coffee and Reflections on Substack, where I'll share my reflections and stories on the weekly virtue. I'm honored to be a part of your story today, and I'm proud of your growth, my friend. I can't wait for our next time together, exploring the vault.